Hello, I'm Dave Neal, the Global Director of Animal Sentience and Welfare for Animals Asia, and I'm here today to talk all about fishes and specifically about fish sentience and some information about fish emotions and cognition. So, fishes, we now know, are sentient animals capable of experiencing pain, stress, and experiencing fear, as well as experiencing a sense of well-being. And this is something which has been debated for many, many years. And I'm going to go through some of the research which has demonstrated that this is the case, that fishes are now classed as sentient animals. Basically, they have the same basic body plan as mammals. This includes a backbone. They have a number of senses similar to ourselves, and they have this peripheral nervous system which runs from the backbone up into the brain, which is sending messages to the brain. They have what we call a pallium within the brain, and this is serving thought now to serve very similar functions to what the neocortex does for mammals and the paleocortex does for birds. And again, this was something which had been debated for a long time, that fishes maybe didn't experience things in the same way that we did because of their lack of neocortex or paleocortex. We now believe that this pallium is the part of the brain which allows fishes to have these similar experiences. So the fish forebrain is containing these brain structures which perform very similar functions to those which we associate with things like pain and fear in other vertebrates. So fishes have something called the dorsomedial and the dorsolateral cerebrium within their brain. These are similar to what we know as the amygdala and the hippocampus within our own brains. And the amygdala is something which regulates our emotions, and the hippocampus is something which was needed for memory and for learning. And if you were to impact upon the ability of, say, the dorsomedial cerebrium within a fish, then they show a drop off in terms of their response to anxiety situations, which would normally show some form of anxiety and fear. So again, showing that there's similar impacts to what the amygdala would have if it was impacted within a mammal. And also, if a fish has its dorsal lateral cerebrium impacted negatively, then they show less ability to be able to learn. Similar again to if we had our hippocampus, which was impacted within mammals, which again demonstrates that these different brain structures, although they are different to in mammals, they're having similar functions to the ones that we are already aware of. Now, a lot of the research which were demonstrating sentience within fish started really around about 2000, 2002, 2003. This was a particularly interesting research project done by Lynn Snedden and colleagues, which demonstrated that brown trout had nociceptors. So it's actually 58 receptors, which were found were located on the face and on the head of brown trout. And nociceptors are receptors which received stimuli and then pass information to the brain. Now, the presence of nociception is not enough to prove that fish actually feel that pain, that they actually experience something. Is it just something that is sending a message to the brain to tell the fish to do a reflex reaction, or is it actually having some kind of negative or positive experience for those fish? So, to look at that, like all animals, we need to look at behavioral changes to see whether their behavior changes in response to these negative stimuli. So, in this case of the brown trout, sorry, then brown trout were conditioned to feed around a feeding ring, and then they were being handled. So they were being taken out of the water and handled. This would cause a little bit of stress for them. Certain individuals were then injected with either bee venom or acetic acid in the lips, and other individuals were not injected with anything. So this was the control group. When they were put back into the water, their heart rates were then monitored, and it was shown that the stress of being handled for the control fish would increase their heartbeats per minute from around about 50 heartbeats per minute to up to about 70. The fish which have received the injections of either acetic acid or bee venom, their heart rates were increasing from about 50 up into 90. But what was particularly interesting was that these fish that had received this injection of some negative stimuli were also then showing some rocking motion, and they were going to the bottom of their tank and rubbing their lips, rubbing the site where the injection had happened upon the gravel, again, showing a behavioral adaptation or a behavior which was similar to our own. If we have an injury ourselves, we're likely to rub that injury because it feels painful for us. So again, demonstrating that they are highly likely to be experiencing the pain themselves. It also took the fish which had the injections 3 times longer to resume normal feeding behavior than it did for the control fish. These fishes are also had negative reaction to pain. This negative reaction also appears to be dramatically reduced if they're then allowed access to a painkiller. So again, similar to ourselves, they're experiencing something negative. They administer a painkiller, and then that pain starts to subside, suggesting that they were experiencing the pain in the first place. The negative stimuli also impairs the fish's ability for awareness and avoidance. So in this case, a novel object was being put into the environment after the fish had been handled and either handled and put back into the water or handled and then injected and put back into the water. For the fish that had just been handled and put back into the water, putting a novel object, in this case it was an actual Lego tower, into their tank, those fish would carry out their normal awareness and avoidance behavior of that novel object. They would stay away from it because they were unsure of what it meant for them. Whereas the fish which had received some kind of negative stimuli to the injections were less likely to avoid that novel object in their environment. And again, this shows that they're now being distracted by the fact that they're feeling this pain, which is then leaving them more vulnerable to new things within their environment, and they're not carrying out their normal awareness and avoidance behaviors. Why is this significant? Well, it's massively significant for the industry, fishing industry. It's estimated that somewhere between 50 and 160 billion fish are being farmed now around the world, and obviously then being killed for consumption. And the estimates are somewhere between 1 and 2.3 trillion wild fish which are being caught and then subjected to things like live chilling and asphyxiation. So again, you can see if fish is being sentient, this is causing a huge amount of suffering to individual fishes by the processes which we use for both fish farming and for industrial fishing. It's been shown through this research experiment back in 2008 that fish can learn to avoid threatening stimuli within their environment, indicating that they're likely to not just feel pain, but also experience some form of anxiety and fear. This has been shown in rainbow trout. So rainbow trout were put into a tank with 2 chambers, and in the chamber that they were in, a net was plunged into that environment randomly, and instantly this would cause the fish some anxiety, and they would swim through to the opposite chamber. The fish were conditioned then through by switching on of a light above their tank, and they would learn that when the light came on, it was 10 seconds before the net was plunged into their tank. So they would learn that if they saw the light, they could move into an opposite tank, and the net wouldn't be plunged into the chamber that they were in. So again, fish, they're learning to avoid this threatening behavior, which suggests that this threatening stimuli was having a negative impact on them emotionally. And it's also been shown that administering something called an NMDA receptor antagonist can actually impair that fear conditioning response. This was actually done in goldfish. So the NMDA is the N-methyl D-aspartic acid, which is a substance which is needed for fish to be able to carry out this learning behavior. So learning to become fearful of something. If then there's an antagonist which is administered, which means that the NMDA substance is not released, then fish didn't show this same reaction as they normally would. So again, showing that there's a process within the fish that allows them to learn from these stimuli, which is a survival mechanism for them. Again, showing that they experience some form of fear. An experiment done with Atlantic salmon here. Atlantic salmon demonstrating a fear-like response. So again, showing that fish have these emotional responses and these negative emotional responses. In this case, they were showing a fear-like response if they were presented with water which contains a trace of the dung from otters that are being fed on salmon. So they were being able to smell the the otter's dung, which contained salmon within it, and this then meant that those fish would flee from the immediate environment. Then they would remain still, and their breathing would increase, showing again that they're having this behavioural response to something which is a threat within their environment. And goldfish have been shown through this research experiment to learn to avoid an area of their aquarium where they receive a mild shock. And this avoidance is reduced if another fish is present next to the zone where they're being shocked. So a very mild shock is put into the environment, which meant that the fish would instantly obviously leave that area because it was something which was negative. Again, showing that they experience this negative, showing that they are sentient. They experience something negative from this negative stimulus, and then they wouldn't want to go back to that environment. But if that was the same environment where they were next to another fish, because they're a social species, then they would trade off the negativity of that experience to remain social. So even though they would receive something negative, they're likely to stay in that environment because they had another fish. So showing that fish will use trade-offs to try to ensure that they stay within a more positive environment. And in this case, it was more positive for them to stay with next to another fish socially than to leave if they receive this negative shock stimuli. It's been shown that zebrafish can experience something called emotional fear. And these are zebrafish which are being confined, so they become a little bit stressed, and their temperature is rising, and each individual's temperature is starting to rise. And this is something in unconfined fish is not happening. The control group are not confined in a small space, and their temperatures are staying the same. Whereas in the group, if new fish are brought into that environment, then again their temperature starts to rise as well. So some evidence again of this emotional fear response to being confined, and this again being an important indicator of the ability to have sentient experiences. So from this very quick run through, then fishes are showing all the hail marks of pain, both physiologically and behaviorally, and the capacity to experience things like stress and fear. And then fishes, in addition to that, also possess complex social as well as emotional and cognitive abilities. And we're going to look at some of those. So some of the bigger fishes, the manta rays, the sharks, white shark, in this case, white sharks, tigers, grey reef, Port Jackson sharks, have shown strong preferences for others within their social networks. And many of these species actually appear to be quite individualistic and spend lots of time on their own. But at certain times, then they might come together, particularly the manta rays, they come together at certain times of the year. And when they do come together, this is not just some sort of random association. It's been noted then that individuals will stay with specific individuals that they've developed a social relationship with. And again, this has been shown in many of those shark species as well as the manta ray, showing that there is a social network which is developing over time with relationships, positive relationships, and probably negative relationships as well, developing between individuals. And this case, an article which was published in 2021 showing social familiarity and how social familiarity within your social group can actually help in terms of avoiding predators. So in this case, social familiarity was helping coral reef fish react to danger because they trusted the signals from familiar individuals. So if it's a familiar individual within their environment and they showed a fear response or a predator avoidance response, then the fish was likely to also show that response and would instantly react. But if a stranger was in that environment, then this became distracting to them, and they maybe wouldn't trust the signals from that stranger, and that would obviously, in the natural world, increase their risk of predation. So, social familiarity is very important for fish to be able to develop these social relationships with others that they trust, and then they trust their behaviors when things are happening. And this is an interesting experiment which was done with the Murray cod, showing that they demonstrate something called pessimism. So pessimistic outlook on life, in this case, pessimistic decision making. And this was, in this case, then smaller Mericod individuals were put into an environment with a much larger individual. And that much larger individual would obviously cause them a significant amount of stress and fear, like a bullying situation. They would then, the smaller individuals were then put into a novel environment, as were fish that hadn't experienced that fear and stress from another individual. And the fish that had been with the larger individual were less likely to explore this novel environment, explore this new area, because they were now very pessimistic because they'd experienced something negative. Whereas the fish that hadn't experienced anything negative would quickly go and explore their new environment, showing that the certain individuals were pessimistic about their environment and about making choices because of the experience that they'd just been through. There's also an experiment done showing that zebrafish can demonstrate this emotional contagion, so being able to sense how other individuals experience things, in this case fear again, and then respond accordingly. And this is really governed by something called oxytocin, which is being released into the fish's brain and giving the fish the ability to actually understand the emotional response of other fishes and experience that fear for themselves, and then make the correct decision. And in this case, the genes which allows for the production and the absorption of the oxytocin into the body were being altered, which meant that the fishes that had that gene altered were not showing the same response when they were put into this environment where there were fish which were experiencing some sort of fear. But if they were then injected with oxytocin, then they would show that response again. So again, showing that a fish can experience this emotional contagion from other fish, and how it's possible to be able to turn that on and off, show that there is an actual process which is happening. Again, demonstrating a level of sentient experience within the zebrafish. Fish can also learn from other fish. In this case, these are minnows, which were learning the fear behavior socially by being raised with fish that had been raised in dangerous environments. So some individuals were raised in an environment where there were lots of smells of predators, so they were quite anxious and fearful and stressful of any smells. And other fish were raised in an environment where there wasn't any at all. And then if some of those were put in with other fish, they would quickly learn when a new smell was put into their environment to become fearful and become anxious of that. Whereas fish that had been raised without any smells at all wouldn't know that this was a new danger for them. The new smells were dangerous, and therefore other fish would not have the capacity to learn from them. So social learning is something which is happening within the fishes, learning from the experiences of others. Social learning has also been shown in things like problem solving here within stingrays. So individuals were trained to remove food from a tube, and then naive individuals were put in with a demonstrator, and the naive individuals would quickly learn by watching the demonstrator how to remove the food from the tube, and they would pick up that ability to be able to solve that problem. If a naive individual was just put in there on their own without the demonstrator, then it took them much longer to learn how to solve this particular problem which had been set for them. So again, showing that individuals will watch and learn from a demonstrator to how to solve a problem. There's also evidence of altruism and fishes making pro-social choices for other individuals. And this experiment was an interesting one done on the convict chitilids. So a male convict chitilid is put into a tank, and there's a second tank next to them, and they can make a choice by going to one area of the tank or another, whether they receive food just for themselves in their tank, or the food is delivered in both tanks. So they don't get any more food, but food can be delivered in both tanks. If there's no other fish in the other tank, then they always made the choice that food would be delivered to them. If there was a fish in the other tank which they had a relationship with, in this case, a male and a female that they'd had offspring with, then the individuals would always deliver food in both tanks. So they were making this altruistic choice, to say it's pro-social choice, to say, I'm going to deliver food to myself and to my conspecific, to this individual that I know. If that individual in that other tank was a stranger to them, then they wouldn't deliver that the food to them. So again, showing that they were making a choice dependent upon the relationship that they had with the individual that was in the other tank. We've also seen how fish cooperate with each other. So in this case, this is rabbit fish. Rabbit fish will pair up and then cooperate when they're feeding. So one individual will be feeding and the other one will be looking out for potential predators, and then they will swap that relationship around so that the other one can feed and the second individual will look out for predators. And there's a short video here which just demonstrates that. So you can see here there's two rabbit fish. One of them goes down to the coral reef to feed, and the second one is doing the vigilance behaviour, watching out for predators. And this alternates on a regular basis. The second individual then going down to feed, and the other individual being the one that remains vigilant, looking for potential predators. Coordination and is also being shown in other fishes. This is a case of problem solving. This is in the clownfish, which wanted to move an object, and you'll see that through this video, and coordinating their activities with other individuals to be able to carry out tasks. The fish have used teamwork to be able to complete a task, coordinating their activities. It has also been shown that fish will cooperate with other species as well. So in this case, these are a group of fish which are cooperating with moray eels, and the group of fish will actually invite a moray eel on a hunting expedition. So they will give a signal to a moray eel to say, let's go out and hunt. And this is interesting because the group of fish catch fish out in the open, and the moray eels are catching fish in amongst the corals. So what generally happens is if a group of fish is around, then fish will go into the coral where the eels can then either catch them or they'll chase them out, and the group of fish has got a better chance of catching its prey. So again, individuals of different species actually cooperating with each other to be able to benefit both of them. Again, there's a video to demonstrate this.
My name is Redouan Shari. I'm a professor in behavioral ecology at the University of Neuchâtel. So I was following a grouper, and all of a sudden it turned towards the reef, and I saw the head of a moray eel sticking out of a crevice. And I thought actually they would start fighting now, who is the dominant predator in the reef. But to my big surprise, the moray eel actually left its crevice, and they swam off together side by side. And after 5 meters or so, the moray eel started moving through crevices while the grouper was clearly waiting outside. And so it was very obvious that they hunt together. So groupers have two ways of signaling. The standard way is that the moray eel is in a crevice and the grouper approaches, and then it shakes its head in rapid succession, and this is the signal, come on, let's hunt. The moray eel sneaks through crevices, and so the best way for the prey to escape a moray eel is to swim into the blue. But in the blue, that's where the grouper is, and so by coordinating their action, they make sure that it's not safe for the prey, neither inside nor outside. And that's how they both increase their hunting success. The other signal is even more exciting, and this is when the grouper typically hunts on its own and the prey escapes into a crevice. And then the grouper does the equivalent of a human pointing gesture that makes a headstand and points towards the place where the prey is hiding. And this then attracts the partner, a moray eel, and hopefully for the grouper flush the prey out again. We got very excited about the field results, and we decided to take the system from the field to the lab and conduct controlled experiments. We constructed an artificial reef, and we also laminated the picture of a moray and attached it to strings. And the right thing to do was that if the prey was above the coral, the groupers had to strike immediately, and if the prey was hiding below the coral, then the right thing to do was to go directly towards the moray eel, and as a reward the grouper would be thrown a piece of food. In the second part of the experiment we had two moray eel models, and the challenge in this experiment was for the groupers to identify that there's one competent and one incompetent moray eel partner, and therefore develop a preference for the competent partner. And the speed of learning and also the precision of their choices equals data published on chimpanzees in a similar experiment. The results clearly show that fish are able to perform rather complex behaviors, that they have an amazing repertoire to solve their daily problems, and hence that they are certainly much smarter than you might have thought.
Again, showing some real...
My name is Redwan Shari. I'm
a real interesting fish behavior, and some very complex fish behavior as well. In this case, coordination of hunting activities and communication between different species. Recent project just from 2023 showing that individuals will risk going away from their group to approach a predator to gather more information, and then will come back and will communicate that threat to their social group. So this is referentially communicating information about a predator to a social group, and again putting yourself at some risk in that situation by being the one that goes out and gathers this information. Male Trinidadian guppies also are known to actually help to work alongside and coordinate their activities with individuals which are known to be related to them, in this case the males and their brothers, by darting in front of other males to try to block access to females so that their own brothers can access females. And again, this is all part of kin selection and passing on your genes through your relatives. But again, shows coordination between individuals to be able to benefit individuals that you are related with, so that they can have access to females for breeding rather than non-related individuals. There's evidence that cleaner fish cooperate. We know they cooperate with each other to be able to clean other fish on the reef. So cleaner fish, they eat the parasites and the dead tissues off the scales of larger fish. Now, it's very tempting for these individuals to take a small bite of the fish because they tend to bite a bit of the flesh of the fish. And if one of these individuals is likely to take a small bite of their client, the client is likely to swim away. And what the other one will do is effectively apologize for this situation by giving a fin massage. So they generally sort of rub themselves up and down the back of the fish in a way which is likely to be pleasurable for the client, and sort of apologizing for the fact that something negative has just happened. And the fish that bites the client and it does completely swim away and it doesn't get the opportunity to do this apology, behavior, then it's actually told off by the partner. So the partner would then chase the other partner because they have broken this social rule between the two of them, which was to clean the fish without harming it, so that it didn't swim away, and they lost the opportunity to do that cleaning process. And there's a short video just to demonstrate.
These are the beauty salons of the reef, and they're often run by a pair of wrasse, small fish with a stripe running from head to tail. These committed cleaners regularly tend to a host of different creatures. They provide a vital service, removing the dead skin and parasites from outside and even inside their clients' bodies. It may seem like a thankless task, but the cleaner fish are getting a good meal out of it. And of all their clients, the manta rays are their star customers. The manta rays surrender themselves completely. Within seconds, a host of fish rush to their side. Each fish tends to a very specific part of the manta's body, and the cleaning can last a full hour. For the most part, the service is second to none, but occasionally the cleaners can get a little carried away. A female wrasse has taken a nibble out of the manta ray's flesh. She's broken the rules, and there's a price to pay. Her partner chases after her. It's the cleaner fish equivalent of a stern telling off. If the bite is a one-off, the manta ray will return. But research has shown that if it happens too often, the pair risks driving regular visitors away. Fortunately, it seems her indiscretion hasn't put their client off. The manta is back and business has resumed. These are...
There's even evidence of play behavior within fishes. This was a paper which was published in 2015, which showed that cichlid fish had been observed repeatedly batting a self-righting thermometer, and this had the hallmarks of play behavior, what's defined as play behavior, which is carrying out something for no particular benefit, which is only beneficial to the fish. So it's like an enrichment within its environment, carrying, in this case, this thermometer, which would keep the batter so it went down and then come back again. Again, types of behavior that have been denied fishes for many, many years are likely to be present, something which the fishes can carry out, something which it's unlikely that many people would say that fishes would do something similar to this, where they're using these enrichments within their environment for their own benefit. Fishes are also shown can be deceitful. In this case, it's the Atlantic mollies. These males are competing for females, and a male, which is known to be being watched by other males, may actually pretend to be interested in mating with a less desirable female to try to deceive other males. So trying to say to the other males which are watching, this is the female that he really wants to mate with, to try to direct their attention to that female so that he can then go to the female that he really wants to breed with. So again, the ability to use deceit to try to put other males off what is something that they desire for themselves. And the fishes also have some parental responsibilities as well. And again, this is something that many people may not think exists within fish, within the fish population. A number of fishes incubate their eggs in their mouths. This is a male jawfish in this case, and they provide this by incubating the eggs within their mouths. So they provide protection for them. Nothing can actually get them and eat them because they're already inside the mouth of the in this case the male. In other fishes it's the female. The male will do this for between 8 and 10 days until the fry actually hatch, and whilst they're in the mouth he aerates them to make sure they're getting enough oxygen, and he doesn't eat throughout that whole process as well. And then when the fry hatch, then they swim out of the mouth and swim away. In other species, that maternal in some of the maternal mouth breeders, in particular the African cichlid, that responsibility goes on beyond just the egg laying and the hatching stage. So in this case, you'll see that the African cittids species will then continue to provide some parental responsibility and some protection via their mouth for their youngsters.
This is a big mouth hab. Her children would make easy prey. And when you have this many babies, you have to have a clever strategy if you want to protect them. This female cichlid guards her offspring in the safest place she can think of. She's not eating them, she's simply keeping them out of harm's way. She will mouth brood her babies for anywhere between 3 to 6 weeks. During this period, she won't feed herself at all. You can understand why. For some cichlids, the art of mouth brooding is easier to master than for others. The urge to protect, however, is strong.
Again, showing that fishes do have some parental responsibilities as well. And something which is becoming more knowledgeable now is the fact that fishes are communicating with each other and communicating with each other through many different signals, but in many cases vocally. So fishes are very good communicators, and they use many different sounds to let each other know what they're doing and what their intentions are. And here's a video just to give a little.
These are fish and invertebrates that are making sound for a range of different reasons. They're sometimes trying to find prey, and they might be hunting together, so they're actually talking to each other while they do this. They might be trying to detect predators, but they're also then using sound to establish a territory, to impress each other. So it's a bit like listening to a full orchestra, and it produces this wonderful cacophony of biological sound. The more we study underwater acoustics, the more we're realizing that technology can help us to unlock the behavior of fish, but we've still only just scratched the surface. What else will we find by listening to the ocean?
Fascinating examples there showing that fishes are very vocal, and something which now we're beginning to see within the literature. So this was a paper which was in the New Scientist. This is a paper from 2022, sorry, which is looking at there's a whole lot more which fishes are talking about beneath the waves, and some fishes have been doing this now, estimated for 155 million years that they've been talking to each other, and yet we're only beginning to learn this. This was the New Scientist piece back in 2016, which was from researchers in Australia, which were saying that there was actually distinct fish choruses within some of the fish population, so you could identify all of these fishes like we do with the bird the dawn chorus with the birds. It was very much sort of putting the fish and the birds on an equal level there in terms of their abilities to vocally communicate with each other. And you can see just how important this is for us to be able to understand this, because there's so much more happening than maybe we know about. Just because we're not actually hearing it doesn't mean to say, obviously, that it's not happening. It is happening, and it's something which is particularly important for us to understand more, or to be able to know learn more about the behaviors of these individual fishes. Fishes aren't just communicating with their bodies and their voices or vocally, they're also communicating chemically as well. So minnows will produce an alarm chemical when they are injured, and this then provides information to others within their immediate environment of the threat. So it means that others will know that there's a major threat which is happening within their environment and can try to escape that threat. And fishes have also shown that they can recognize each other, and this would make sense. There are social individuals, they develop social relationships. This was an experiment with cichlid fish that were recognizing others through their facial color patterns, and then using this to tell which individuals were familiar, so therefore something that they could trust, and choosing which ones were unfamiliar and a potential threat. Again, purely through recognizing the facial coloring patterns on other fish. Memory capacity is something that has been known about for some time. This was actually a study many years ago now, over 50 years ago, back in 1971, looking at frill-finned goby fish. These are tidal pool fish, so they swim over the tidal pool. So when the tide's in and these little pools are there, they create a mental map of their environment. When the tide goes back out and they get stuck in one of these tidal pools, they've got a mental map of where all the other pools are around them, and this can help them to move from one pool to another. So if there's no food in the tidal pool that they're stuck in, they can jump out and go straight into another pool. Or it also means if there's a predator within their tidal pool that they're stuck in, it can also help them to jump from one rock pool to another to escape those predators. The goldfish has always been a species that we've kind of made up this myth about not having any kind of abilities, any kind of memory capacity. Actually, that couldn't be further from the truth. This was an experiment published in 2022, which shows that they have a travel distance memory, and they use counting to be able to memorize the distance that they've traveled. In this case, goldfish individuals were trained to swim, and after they swam for 70 centimeters, then somebody would wave their hand above the tank, and eventually the fish learned that once the hand was waved, they would receive this food reward. They then stopped the hand waving, and the fish would swim to exactly the same point to receive the food reward. So they knew the distance that they needed to travel. The experimenters changed the starting point to show that it wasn't just the fact that they were looking at a particular end point, a particular marker, but they were actually using some kind of calculation to be able to travel that set distance before they received the food reward. And it was the markers on the bottom of the tank which were being used. So there'd been stripes painted on the bottom of the tank. The fish were likely to be counting those markers to know where the 70 centimeter point was, which is where they received that reward. And when those markers the distance between those markers was reduced, then the distance they swam was actually reduced, because they were using those markers as a reference point to be able to count, to say, once I get to this point, then I will get the food reward. So being able to count, but also to memorize the distance that what that represented in terms of the distance that they needed to travel. Archer fish also shown this counting ability of many other species as well. In this case, it was shown archer fish were trained that if they so archer fish spit out water to be able to knock to knock their prey, such as insects, invertebrates, off of leaves which are above the water. So archer fish were trained if they spat out at certain numbers of dots, so all kinds of different numbers, discs with numbers of dots on. In this case, it was if they hit the 6 dot, the disc with 6 dots on, then they received a reward. So they quickly learn that they're presented with 2 discs, they can count the difference, hit the one with 6 on. Interestingly, if they were then presented with, say, 5 and 7, they would always go with the one which was one less than the number which they'd been trained to spit their water jet at, so they would always go with the 5. So again, showing that they have this ability to be able to cognitively understand this relatively complex relationship. And even more complex is then actually performing something which is simple mathematics and learning that shapes can actually signify different mathematical rules. So in this case, this was done with both cichlids and stingrays. They actually learn to add and subtract 1 to receive a food reward. So This was done through training the fish on on learning to recognize shapes and the color of those shapes. So say they're presented with a photograph of 4 blue squares, and they were then presented with 2 new photographs, one showing 3 blue squares and one showing 5 blue squares. They learned over a period of time. If they then swam to the one with 5 blue squares, which was one in addition to the 4 that they'd originally been shown, they would receive a reward. If those squares were then yellow, they were presented with 4 yellow squares, photograph, and then presented with 3 yellow squares and 5 yellow squares. They quickly learned that if they swam to the one with 3, then this was -1 from the 4, and they would receive a food reward. So again, they're then using this memory to say, what was it that I was presented with at the start with, and what is the association of the color? So if it's yellow, they know to subtract. If it's blue, they learn to add 1 on. And what was interesting, then the experimenters changed the shapes. They remained the blue and the yellow color, but they changed the shape so that they were using not just squares, but using some circles, some triangles, some squares, and a mixture. And the fish continue to be able to perform this mathematical calculation. So recognizing the number of objects that they're presented with, inferring from the color whether they needed to add or subtract, and then go into the right amount at the second part of the experiment. There's also been evidence of self-recognition within fish, and this is something which, you know, it's been we've talked about and been talked about for a long time with the chimpanzees and elephants and dolphins and some of the species which we see as very cognitively complex, being able to recognize themselves in a mirror through a mark test by putting a mark on the fish which the fish can't see unless it looks in the mirror, and then looking at the behavior of those individuals. And in this case, the individuals would go to a substrate and rub the part where this mark was, which they couldn't see, after they'd seen it in the mirror, showing that they recognized that mark, the mark which they were seeing in the mirror was actually on them themselves. So having self-recognition and awareness about themselves. And it's been shown with a number of different species, in this case cichlids, they're capable of self-assessment. They often engage in these dominance fights, with the males particular. And when individual unfamiliar fish appear, individuals will watch them fight other fish and then weigh up their own chances. This is something called transitive inference. So they will, if they see a fish which is bigger than them fighting with another fish and it loses, they're not likely to take on that fish themselves, because they know that it's already beaten a fish which is likely to beat them. So again, being able to put this information together cognitively within their minds to assess their own abilities, their own size, and their own fighting ability against watching other individuals. And then this very interesting foraging task, which cleaner wrasse were proven to be incredibly efficient at, and actually in this case were more efficient than many of the primates which were given the same task. And in this task, the fishes were given 2 plates, a red plate of food and a blue plate of food. They were then allowed access to these plates of food, but the red plate of food is removed after 2 minutes. So every time the red plate of food is removed. It took 45 trials of this for the cleaner wrasse in this experiment to learn that the best thing that they needed to do was instantly eat from the red plate as much as they could, because the red plate was going to remove, and then they would be left with the blue plate. So they could maximize the amount of food they could eat by always starting with the red plate. And it took 45 goes before the cleaner wrasse learned to do this, but they did learn to do it. With the primates that were tested on the same experiment, then with orangutans, they didn't get this association to learn to go to the red plate first. With capuchin monkeys, they didn't either. And chimpanzees were taken on average around 70 trials before they were learning to do this. So again, just showing that level of complexity, that cognitive complexity in terms of problem solving that some of the fish species, in this case, is the cleaner wrasse have. And then something which has become a little bit more sort of mainstream more recently through some of the very good natural history programs, we're starting to see that fish are also tool users as well. So in this case, tusked fish, which can open clams by smashing them against rocks, which we've got in a short video here.
He's searching for something special to eat amongst the coral rubble and sand. this one. A small clam. But how to crack it open and get to the meat? He takes it all the way back to his special kitchen. A bowl-shaped coral that has a particular bump on the inside that he always uses. It's not easy if you have no hands. Whoops. There it goes again. But he's got great determination. And surprising accuracy. At last. So here is a fish that uses tools. Some fish are much cleverer than you might suppose.
It's also been shown, as we saw earlier in the archer fish, which is actually using water as a tool. So this is the fish which is spitting out a jet of water, and not only are they just spitting that out, but they're actually having to make a calculation because of the light refraction at the surface of water. It means that the actual when they spit out their water, they need to make sure that they get the arc of the water come out of from underneath the water to hit the prey species. So again, they learn this over a period of time, being able to use water as a tool, as a hunting tool, to be able to knock off invertebrates which are sitting on leaves in the water, and then for them to be able to eat them. And again, just a short video.
While some use vicious weapons to dispatch prey, others employ the finesse of a marksman. The archer fish uses a water pistol. It makes a gun barrel by pressing its tongue against a groove in its mouth. It closes its gills to force out the water. It's accurate up to 2 meters. This expert in ballistics even allows for the curving of the jet through gravity. And adjusts for the way light bends at the boundary between water and air, which appears to shift the position of its target. By some amazing computation, it changes its firing angle to compensate for this optical illusion. Archers target anything that moves or glows.
Very successful then as a hunting tool. So hopefully through this presentation, this is giving you evidence that fishes are truly complex individuals. They have very complex social lives. They have complex emotional responses. In many cases, we've shown the fear, anxiety responses, but also some of those positive emotional responses as well, and also have these very complex cognitive capacities for learning, capacities problem solving, and capacities for memory. And hopefully this has given you a different perspective on fishes and a more of an understanding of how fishes experience their world, and how, as sentient individuals, then we have a responsibility to ensure that they don't suffer, but also the fishes that we are responsible for are in an environment where they can actually experience a sense of well-being, as well as not suffering from pain and fear and stress. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation.